A while back I did a video outlining a method for getting about 4 inches of lift in the rear for free. This method has received quite a bit of disapproval by some, but, well, it's muddy now, but basically just flip the hanger over so the shackle points downward, and then what I did is I mounted it lower on the frame rail with the lower two holes on the lower two holes of the frame. So these were what were formerly the upper holes up here. This time I'm going to show how to do extended radius arms for free and maybe some tips on finishing the rest of the job for lifting the front. These are the Rancho radius arms. They're pretty good, but they're probably not the best. I've had these fail. This one here actually bent right here. It bent inward, and that had been something that had been slowly happening for some time. When that happened, I bent it back, as you can obviously tell, but when that happened it split apart here, and they'll need to be redone or replaced. When that happened, the tire moved backwards and bound against the body right here and locked up. I was up here in this field doing a power slide at about 35-40 miles an hour when that happened, and it pitched me over pretty good. Speaking of rolls, after the roll videos, I thought a couple people had asked about what kind of damage I had received. Up until that last roll that I mentioned, there was none. On that last roll, however, I broke my windshield. Due to the fact that the dirt was so soft, my exo cage sunk in a lot. Now what you can do to get extended radius arms using your old radius arms, I'll show you here. Cut the arm right here and then extend it with a piece of DOM tubing. Something that maybe just slips over what's left here, and then just slips over this what's left, and then you weld both sides. And when that's done, it should come out looking something like it does on this truck. Like that. What you have to remember, two things that are important, is if you do a 4-inch lift, for instance, wherever the radius arm bushing used to be, right here where we cut it off, that has to be exactly 4 inches lower than where it was in its stock position. And this will keep the caster on the front axle correct. That's a tilt forward and backward. That's very important for steering. Whatever distance you extend that by, you'll have to move this radius arm bracket back the same amount. Remember, keep this, put a bend in it if you have to. You see the little bend reinforced on this one. But you just have to make sure that it's exactly 4 inches lower than the stock mounting position. The bump stops should still line up right here, should still line up directly above the axle. So you want to double check all that before you make your final welds. This truck also has the rear shackle flip and drop lift, which I think most of you probably think this is hokey, but you can feel free to reinforce that all you want. This is the general idea. This one just has some bracing up on top. You can just kind of see it there. That gains 3.5 inches. If you're going to plan on doing any hard off-roading or jumping of any sort, especially jumping, going over whoops, anything that involves massive suspension compression, here's a couple of things that I learned the hard way. The shock and spring towers on these trucks is, well, it's not that strong. It's just mounted to the frame here. And after being slammed on over and over again, as you can see by the bend of the spring there slightly, this shock mount tower has bent upward and inward slightly. So that would need to be reinforced. Since the camber of the wheel is determined by the height that it's riding at, it's going to start leaning in on top. As you can see, that wheel is slightly. So I've lost a little bit of lift due to that. Plus it's messed up the alignment. So what I would do to reinforce that, before it bends, I would attach something onto this side, have it probably be something that can unbolt, go up over the engine, over to the shock tower on this side. You'll have to cut through your inner fenders if you still have them. You could use like a 3-bolt flange here and on the other side. Just use some strong tubing, connect them together, that way they'll be braced against each other. Another thing is the way that the shocks are mounted on these. They're just a pin mounted from one side, so that puts a lot of shear on it every time it's compressed, and that can lead to breakage such as this, where it just kind of ripped out of there. So adding something that attaches here another flange basically, so that's braced on both sides, would be a good improvement. Another thing which you should do that's very important, the cab mounts, which are right here. Sort of hard to see on the video, but it's actually bent downward at the end because of the impact from jumping it over and over again. And now the cab is actually sitting on the frame rail right there. You can see where the frame rail is smashing up against the floor right there. It's even cracking a little bit. What I would do to prevent that would be, it's a little late here, but I'd probably weld square tubing up right in this corner, small square tubing in several places, and then something similar in the back, basically just mounting the cab to the frame rail directly, solid mounting it. Bushings are also bad because they allow the body to move around a lot on the frame, which is a good thing for just driving down the road and keeping it quiet inside, but for off-roading it moves around too much and it causes the body to flex a lot and break apart. Here, for instance, my hood hinge is ripped out from the front of the truck, flexing side to side. Mount the body to the frame and to the cage in as many places as possible, as solidly as possible. If I could go back, I'd probably mount a couple braces to the bumper at an angle on each side, one on each side. That would prevent the nose of the truck from moving side to side. I'd get rid of these squishy mounts and replace them with something solid. As you can see, this one's bent down and it's on the frame right here anyway. But I'd mount all that solid. Mount it solid in the back as we talked about, and then anywhere up here I'd mount it solid too, which I had already started to do. Where the cage goes through the cab, I did it like this actually, so I could put the shell on and off still. That helped the top of the cab from wiggling around a lot. Which the first windshield that shattered, that was why it shattered, from the cab flexing. This solved that problem. One thing I forgot to mention about the lift was the springs, shocks, and Pitman arm. If you choose to do your lift using axle pivot drop brackets like this, then you have to get what's called a drop Pitman arm. That's this arm that goes to the steering box. You need a drop Pitman arm because with this style front end, this point always has to remain exactly the same height as the axle pivots. So the Pitman arm has to bring it down to the same height as the axle pivots. Otherwise, as the suspension compresses, it'll toe in and toe out. So we're going to need to buy shocks that are the correct length. The way to figure out the length for the shocks is with the spring removed. Remove the spring, put a jack under the axle and jack it all the way up until the bump stop touches. Then measure the distance between the lower shock mount and the upper shock mount. That is the compressed distance of the shock. You might want to take an inch off that just for a little headroom. Another thing you'll need is longer brake lines, or you could also plumb this down lower on the rail. If you brought it down another 4 or 5 inches, that would be plenty. Even 4 inches. It's only a 4-inch lift. I recommend going with the longer lines. Obviously, you'll have to buy 4-inch lift springs. I know this isn't the best way to lift it, but this video is about how to get a lot for very little money. I think it's a pretty good method. I've beat the heck out of this truck for quite a while, and none of the modified parts that I have had on there have failed so far. The rear spring shackle flip hasn't failed. It's been through the Rubicon. I've jumped it quite a bit. Anyway, yeah, you can spend money, spend a couple thousand and get it done right. Or if you don't have a lot of money to spend, the springs are about 150 bucks. You're going to need those one way or another. And the drop Pitman arm is about $60, $70. You're going to need that, and you're going to need the axle pivot drop brackets. Of course, you could fabricate your stock brackets to move it down by 4 inches too. Another thing you can do, which is actually better than the drop bracket, is what's called a cut and turn I-beam, which is where you actually cut the I-beam, and this requires a bit of precision. I'm sure you can do some research and find out the exact angle and whatnot. But you cut the I-beam out here, I believe near the knuckle, and turn it, move the bottom out so it turns the wheel upward, and that way you can use the stock axle pivot locations, and when you have the lift, the camber on these wheels will still be correct. They won't be leaning out on the top.